In 1972, major publishing houses rejected Jane Roberts's transcribed sessions with Seth, calling the material too dangerous for public consumption. What made these conversations so threatening? Seth's detailed descriptions of consciousness after death directly challenged both religious doctrine and scientific materialism. Unlike typical channeled material, Roberts produced over 20 volumes of systematic teachings spanning 2 decades. Seth didn't offer vague spiritual platitudes. He provided precise explanations of how consciousness navigates death, complete with specific timeframes and processes that modern near-death experience research now validates. Publishers feared these revelations would destabilize established beliefs about mortality. Seth described death not as an ending, but as a transition where consciousness expands beyond physical limitations. He outlined exactly what happens in those crucial first moments after your last breath, information that religious institutions had carefully guarded for centuries. Roberts, a former skeptic and published poet, became an unlikely conduit for this forbidden knowledge. Her meticulous documentation created an unprecedented archive of afterlife intelligence that mainstream authorities desperately wanted suppressed. Today, we're examining what Seth revealed about those pivotal first 3 minutes after death, and why this knowledge was deemed too revolutionary for 1970s society. Forget everything Hollywood has taught you about death. There's no dramatic moment where consciousness suddenly cuts to black, no tunnel of light leading to some eternal resting place where you float on clouds playing harps. The religious narratives aren't much better. This idea of instant judgment, immediate heaven or hell, your soul whisked away to some distant realm the moment your heart stops beating. Seth's description of death is so radically different from these cultural narratives that it's no wonder publishers in 1972 called it too dangerous. Because once you understand what actually happens, the entire fear-based control system around death starts to crumble. According to Seth, death is the most natural transition you'll ever experience. Think about waking up from a vivid dream, that moment when you gradually realize you're no longer in the dream world, but you're not jarred or traumatized by the shift. You simply find yourself in a different state of awareness. Death, Seth explains, is remarkably similar, except you're waking up into a broader reality rather than a narrower one. The process doesn't begin when your heart stops. It starts days, sometimes weeks, before what medical professionals call clinical death. This is why hospice workers and hospital staff witness phenomena they can't explain through conventional medicine. Dying patients suddenly become lucid and start conversations with deceased relatives no one else can see. They describe beautiful landscapes or mention visiting places from their childhood in vivid detail, even when they haven't left their bed. Family members often report dreams where their dying relative visits them, sometimes days before the actual death announcement. These aren't coincidences or grief-induced hallucinations. Seth explains that consciousness is already beginning its gradual withdrawal from the physical focus, starting to explore the broader reality it's about to fully enter. The process works like a balloon, slowly rising and drifting away, rather than a light switch suddenly clicking off. Seth describes something he calls the silver cord, an energy connection between consciousness and the physical body that gradually loosens during this withdrawal period. Think of it as consciousness slowly untethering itself, testing the waters of this new state while still maintaining some connection to physical reality. This creates what Seth calls a dual state during the withdrawal period. Sometimes the dying person's consciousness is fully focused in their physical body, having normal conversations and interactions. Other times they're exploring after-death realities, which is why they might suddenly start talking to deceased relatives or describing places others can't perceive. Medical professionals often dismiss these experiences as oxygen deprivation or medication effects, but Seth's explanation makes far more sense of the consistent patterns. These people aren't hallucinating, they're accessing broader reality frequencies that most of us, locked into physical focus, simply can't perceive. When the final separation occurs, Seth describes it as immediate relief and expansion. Imagine you've been living in a cramped, windowless room your entire life, and suddenly, the walls disappear and you find yourself in a vast, beautiful landscape. The sense of limitation simply vanishes. Physical pain disappears instantly because consciousness is no longer receiving nerve signals from the body. But here's what's crucial. Your memories, personality, and sense of self remain completely intact. You're still you, just operating from a much broader perspective. The most detailed accounts of this transition process were actually contained in sessions that Jane Roberts' publisher refused to include in the main Seth books, considering them too explicit for general audiences. These suppressed materials contain specific instructions for navigating the after-death state, which is why we've compiled them in our Insights Academy newsletter, along with our free Kybalion ebook that explores similar consciousness principles from the Hermetic tradition. Seth emphasizes that your attitude during this transition dramatically affects how smooth the process feels. Fear and resistance create what he calls psychic turbulence, like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. People who fight the process or cling desperately to physical life experience more confusion and disorientation. Those who accept the transition with curiosity or even welcome it find the shift almost effortless. This isn't about giving up on life or embracing death prematurely. It's about understanding that consciousness is far more resilient and continuous than we've been taught to believe. What happens immediately after the transition is fascinating and reveals the incredible intelligence of consciousness itself. Seth explains that initial after-death experiences align with your existing belief structures because your consciousness needs familiar frameworks to process this new state without being overwhelmed. Christians encounter Jesus or angelic beings. Buddhists find themselves in bardo states they've studied. Muslims meet the figures they expect from their teachings. Atheists often experience peaceful, neutral environments without religious symbolism, exactly what they'd be most comfortable with. This isn't because these various religious systems are true in some exclusive way. It's because consciousness is incredibly adaptive and creates transitional experiences that feel safe and comprehensible. Think of it like arriving in a foreign country where someone who speaks your language greets you and helps you get oriented before you start learning the local customs. Seth describes what he calls a 3-day adjustment period after death, during which consciousness gradually acclimates to operating without physical focus. This time frame isn't arbitrary. Cultures around the world independently developed wake and mourning traditions lasting exactly 3 days, as if they intuitively recognize this adjustment period. During these 3 days, the newly deceased often remain somewhat aware of their physical environment and the people grieving for them. They might attempt to communicate, which sometimes manifests as electrical disturbances, temperature changes, or that sense of presence mourners often report feeling. The implications of Seth's description extend far beyond just understanding death itself. If consciousness is this continuous and resilient, if death is simply a transition rather than an ending, then our entire approach to living changes. The fear that drives so many of our decisions, the desperate clinging to security and control, the way we avoid taking risks or pursuing our deeper purposes, all of this shifts when you truly grasp that your essential self continues regardless of what happens to your physical body. This understanding was considered too dangerous in 1972 because it threatens every institution that derives power from people's fear of death. But perhaps it's exactly what we need to hear now, when so many are questioning the fundamental assumptions we've built our lives upon. The question everyone asks when they're facing death or grieving a loss is heartbreakingly simple. Will I see them again? And Seth's answer might surprise you because it's both yes and no, but not in the way you've been taught to think about it. Here's what Seth revealed that made those publishers so uncomfortable back in 1972. When you die, you absolutely can encounter your deceased loved ones, but they're not showing up as who they actually were in their final moments. What you're experiencing is something Seth called camouflage, and it's one of the most compassionate acts in the universe. Picture this. Your grandmother appears to you, but she's not the frail, confused woman from the nursing home. Instead, she's exactly as she was during those magical summer afternoons when you were 8 years old. Flower on her apron, that mischievous smile, moving with the energy and clarity you remember from your childhood. Your father shows up wearing that old fishing jacket he loved, the one that smelled like pipe tobacco and lake water, not the hospital gown from his final days. These aren't deceptions or illusions. According to Seth, these are conscious choices made by evolved consciousnesses who understand something profound about transition and comfort. They're presenting themselves in forms specifically designed to help orient and reassure the newly deceased person. But it goes much deeper than just appearance. Seth described how entire initial environments get constructed to feel familiar and safe. If you lived your whole life in a small Midwestern town, you might find yourself in surroundings that echo those comforting elements. The sound of wind through maple trees, the smell of fresh bread from a bakery, the distant sound of a train whistle. These aren't random memories playing out. They're carefully crafted experiences designed to ease the shock of transition. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The beings you encounter aren't necessarily the people you expect. Seth explained that what we call spirit guides are often soul family members from multiple incarnations. That person who feels so familiar and trustworthy might have been your brother in this lifetime, but your teacher in 3 previous ones, or your childhood best friend in one life, your mother in another. The recognition you feel isn't just from this current existence, it's soul recognition spanning multiple lifetimes. The way communication happens in these encounters is unlike anything we experience in physical reality. Seth described it as direct thought transmission, where every nuance, every emotional undertone, every complex concept gets transmitted instantly, without any possibility for misunderstanding. Imagine trying to explain a complicated feeling to someone and having them understand not just your words, but every layer of meaning, every associated memory, every subtle emotional coloring, all in an instant. This communication method also explains something fascinating about the afterlife realms themselves. Seth revealed that thought has creative power there in ways we can barely comprehend. Think of a rose, and one might manifest around you. Remember a favorite song from your teenage years, and it might begin playing in the environment around you. The very act of focused thought becomes a creative force. This concept explains something that's puzzled researchers studying near-death experiences for decades. Why do Christians often report seeing Jesus, while Buddhists encounter Buddha, and Muslims might meet Islamic figures? Seth suggested these are often guides taking familiar forms, rather than actual encounters with these historical or religious figures. The guides understand that appearing as a recognizable spiritual authority will be comforting and acceptable to the newly deceased person. But here's something Seth shared that might challenge your assumptions about eternal reunion. Not everyone maintains the same connections after death. Souls may move in different developmental directions, and this doesn't diminish the love that was shared, but it means the relationship dynamics you knew in physical life might not continue unchanged in non-physical reality. Some people resist this entire reunion process, especially those with very fixed beliefs about what the afterlife should look like. Seth described how guides work patiently with these individuals, sometimes taking years of Earth time to present themselves in forms that feel acceptable and non-threatening. A person who expected to meet Saint Peter at pearly gates might need guides who can work within that framework initially. The resistance isn't just about religious expectations either. Some people arrive in non-physical reality, so attached to their earthly identity that they struggle to recognize loved ones who appear in their fuller, multi-dimensional forms. A widow might reject her husband's presence because he appears too vibrant, too complete compared to the sick man she nursed through his final illness. What makes this information so profound is understanding the dual purpose behind these spiritual reunions. Yes, they provide emotional comfort during a potentially disorienting transition, but they're also practical education sessions. These encounters help the newly deceased understand their options for continued existence. Your deceased grandmother isn't just there to make you feel better, she's there to help you understand the choices ahead of you. Do you want to reincarnate quickly? Take time for learning and development in non-physical reality. Work on healing relationships or karmic patterns. Explore other dimensions of existence. These reunions serve as orientation sessions for one of the most important decision-making periods in your soul's journey. Seth's description transforms death from an ending into a sophisticated transition process, managed by consciousnesses who have evolved far beyond our current understanding, yet who remember exactly what it feels like to be human, confused, and missing the people we love. The implications of this information extend far beyond comfort about death. They suggest that love and connection transcend physical existence in ways that make our current separation from deceased loved ones temporary and ultimately illusory. Forget everything Hollywood has taught you about the life review. There's no cosmic courtroom, no divine judge sitting on a throne with a gavel, and definitely no thumbs up or thumbs down verdict on whether you've been good enough. That's pure fantasy designed to keep you fearful and compliant while you're alive. The actual life review process that Seth describes is far more profound and personally transformative than any religious doctrine could capture. You become both the reviewer and the reviewed, experiencing a level of awareness that's impossible while you're trapped in physical form. This isn't about external judgment, it's about understanding with crystal clarity the intricate web of cause and effect that your choices created throughout your lifetime. Here's what actually happens. You literally re-experience key moments from your life, but with a perspective that transcends anything you could access while incarnated. You simultaneously understand the thoughts, feelings, and motivations of everyone involved in each situation, while maintaining an objective awareness that reveals the deeper patterns and connections you missed the first time around. Let me give you a specific example. Remember that harsh third-grade teacher who made your life miserable? During your life review, you don't just re-experience your own fear and frustration. You suddenly understand her complete perspective, the divorce proceedings that were destroying her emotionally, the financial pressures keeping her awake at night, and most surprisingly, the genuine concern beneath her strict exterior. She pushed you academically because she recognized recognized potential you didn't even know you had. What felt like cruelty was actually her clumsy attempt to prepare you for challenges she could see coming. Or consider that heated argument with your spouse when work stress made you lash out unfairly. In the life review, you experience your partner's emotional devastation in real time, not just their hurt feelings, but the deeper wound of feeling unloved and unappreciated. You understand how your words triggered childhood abandonment fears they never shared with you. Simultaneously, you see the broader context, how that argument became a turning point that eventually led to better communication patterns in your relationship. But the life review reveals something even more extraordinary: the ripple effects of seemingly insignificant actions. That spontaneous smile you gave a stranger at the coffee shop, you discover it prevented them from making a devastating decision that morning. They'd been contemplating ending their marriage, but your unexpected kindness reminded them that goodness still existed in the world. They went home and had an honest conversation with their spouse instead, ultimately saving not just their relationship, but creating a completely different trajectory for their children's emotional development and future relationships. On the flip side, moments of casual cruelty create wounds that lasted decades. That offhand comment you made about someone's appearance in high school, you experience how it became the foundation of their lifelong struggle with self-worth, affecting every relationship and opportunity that followed. The depth of your life review depends entirely on your own spiritual development and value system. Souls who approach this process with crushing guilt often prolong the experience unnecessarily, getting stuck in cycles of self-recrimination that serve no constructive purpose. Meanwhile, those who bring self-compassion and genuine curiosity to the review move through it fluidly, extracting maximum learning without unnecessary suffering. This isn't cosmic punishment, it's cosmic education. The life review reveals the deeper purposes and lessons you intended to work through during that particular incarnation. That difficult relationship with your controlling parent, you chose it specifically to work through patterns of independence and personal authority. Those career setbacks that felt devastating, they were perfectly timed redirections toward your true life purpose. Even chronic illness takes on new meaning when you understand it was chosen to develop patience, compassion, and inner strength. Seth's teachings become particularly profound when addressing major traumas from this expanded perspective. The abuse survivor discovers their chosen experience developed a strength and compassion that became a beacon of hope for countless others facing similar struggles. Their healing journey inspired family members, friends, and even strangers to find their own path to recovery. What appeared to be senseless suffering revealed itself as deliberate soul-level curriculum with far-reaching positive impacts. Similarly, addiction struggles that seem to destroy families often become generational healing catalysts. The person who battled substance abuse and found recovery creates a template for breaking destructive patterns that had persisted through multiple generations. Their children grow up with awareness and tools that prevent them from falling into the same traps, fundamentally altering their family's trajectory. The timing of life review varies dramatically based on the complexity of the life lived and the soul's readiness to process the experience. Some consciousness move through the review in what we'd consider days, while others take what appears to be centuries. But remember, time operates completely differently in non-physical dimensions, so these aren't tedious waiting periods filled with boredom or suffering. The review process is actually deeply engaging and fascinating. You're discovering connections and meanings that were invisible during your physical lifetime. Every revelation brings deeper understanding of your own nature and the interconnected web of consciousness that connects all beings. Most importantly, the life review prepares your consciousness for the next phase of decisions about your continued evolution. Some souls choose to remain in afterlife dimensions for extended periods, working as guides or teachers for those still incarnating. Others feel drawn to reincarnate relatively quickly, eager to apply their newfound understanding in another physical lifetime. Still others discover they're ready to explore entirely different forms of existence, perhaps in different dimensional realities or even different universe systems altogether. The life review isn't about judgment. It's about integration and preparation for whatever comes next in your eternal journey of consciousness expansion. Now here's where Seth's revelations become absolutely mind-bending. After that profound life review process we just explored, consciousness doesn't simply float around in some vague heavenly realm. According to Seth, there's actually a sophisticated, systematic structure to what happens next. 3 distinct territories of consciousness that operate like interconnected learning environments. But before we dive in, you need to understand something crucial. These aren't physical places you travel to like boarding a cosmic bus. They're states of consciousness that appear as complete interactive environments to those experiencing them. Think about your dreams for a moment. Your bedroom doesn't physically transform into that childhood school, where you're suddenly taking a test in your underwear. But to your dreaming consciousness, that school hallway is absolutely real. You can touch the lockers, feel the cold floor, hear the bell ringing. That's exactly how these territories work, except with a level of reality and consistency that makes our physical world look like a rough sketch. The first territory is what Seth calls the immediate post-death realm, and it's designed with incredible compassion. Picture consciousness that's just shed its physical body, confused, possibly frightened, still thinking in terms of needing shelter, familiar surroundings, comfort. This realm responds instantly to those needs. If a newly deceased person desperately misses their childhood home, that house appears around them, complete with the creaking floorboard on the stairs and the smell of their mother's cooking. If they long for their favorite garden, it manifests in perfect detail. Every flower, every stone pathway, exactly as they remember it. But here's the game-changing difference that gradually dawns on these souls. This environment operates according to thought, not physical law. Want a garden? The moment you truly desire it, one appears. Missing your grandmother's kitchen? It materializes instantly. And she might even be there, bustling around making your favorite cookies. The woman who spent her final years in a nursing home suddenly finds herself back in her prime, in the house she loved most, surrounded by the people who meant everything to her. Seth describes people spending months, sometimes years, in these recreated versions of their earthly lives. There's no rush, no cosmic deadline. A man might recreate his workshop, spending time with tools that respond to his intentions rather than physical effort. A teacher might find herself in a classroom where every student is eager to learn and every lesson unfolds perfectly. They're not trapped in these scenarios. They're gently adjusting to a fundamental truth. Consciousness creates reality, not the other way around. Time operates completely differently here. That grandmother in the kitchen, she might have died decades before this person was even born, but in this realm, they can have genuine conversations, sharing wisdom and love that transcends linear time. Even more fascinating, people report interactions with still living loved ones, not the personality dealing with mortgage payments and traffic jams, but the soul essence of that person, the deeper self that exists beyond their current physical incarnation. The second territory opens up once consciousness becomes comfortable with its enhanced creative abilities. This is where the real education begins. Vast, collaborative learning centers that make our greatest universities look like kindergarten classrooms. But instead of studying subjects, beings explore reality itself. Groups with similar interests gather to investigate the nature of consciousness, to experiment with creative abilities that have no physical limitations, to understand how thoughts actually become reality. Imagine studying mathematics, where equations dance in three-dimensional space, where you can step inside geometric relationships and experience them from within. Picture exploring music, where you don't just hear harmonies, but become them, understanding how sound and vibration create the underlying structure of existence. These beings investigate how probable realities branch from single decisions, learning to trace the infinite paths that stem from each choice point in any life. What's particularly striking is how beings in this realm participate in incarnated lives. They become guides, sources of inspiration, protective influences, that sudden flash of insight that solves a problem you've wrestled with for weeks, that inexplicable urge to take a different route home that later turns out to have prevented an accident. These often originate from consciousness operating in this second territory, beings who maintain loving connections with those still in physical form. The third territory is where consciousness prepares for its next phase of development. This might involve reincarnation, but Seth makes clear there are many other possibilities. For those choosing to return to physical life, the planning process is incredibly detailed and sophisticated. Consciousness evaluates potential parents not just for genetic compatibility, but for the psychological and spiritual dynamics they'll provide. They consider cultural contexts, historical periods, even specific challenges that will foster the particular type of growth they're seeking. But here's where it gets truly mind-bending. Seth describes multiple probable selves existing simultaneously. While you're living this current lifetime, aspects of your consciousness are exploring other potential versions. What if you'd taken that job in another city? What if you'd married someone else? What if you'd been born into different circumstances? These aren't just theoretical possibilities. They're actual experiences happening in parallel dimensions of reality. Not everyone chooses reincarnation. Advanced beings might become guides and teachers, helping others navigate these territories. Some explore dimensions of pure creativity, working with concepts so advanced they're incomprehensible to incarnated consciousness. Others merge with larger consciousness units that manage entire systems of reality. Imagine being part of the collective awareness that maintains the physical laws of an entire universe. Movement between these territories isn't rigid or linear. A consciousness might spend time in all three simultaneously, or focus intensively on one area for centuries before exploring others. It depends entirely on individual development, interests, and chosen paths of growth. What makes this information so valuable is how it reframes our entire understanding of life's purpose. We're not just struggling through a single existence hoping for a peaceful afterlife. We're eternal consciousnesses engaged in an infinite curriculum of growth, creativity, and exploration, with physical life being just one incredibly rich classroom in an endless university of existence. Here's what every major religion gets spectacularly wrong about reincarnation, and it's costing you your understanding of what you actually are. The Eastern traditions paint it as this endless wheel of suffering, this cosmic treadmill you're trapped on until you somehow achieve perfect enlightenment and escape. Buddhism calls it samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth driven by karma and desire, where the ultimate goal is to stop reincarnating entirely. Hinduism presents it as working off karmic debts, climbing some spiritual ladder through countless lifetimes of struggle. Meanwhile, Western Christianity and Islam reject reincarnation completely, insisting you get one shot at existence before eternal judgment. One life, then heaven or hell forever. That's it. Both approaches miss something revolutionary that Seth revealed through Jane Roberts, something that changes everything about how you understand your own existence. You're not trapped on any wheel, you're not paying off cosmic debts, and you're definitely not being punished or tested by some cosmic judge. Reincarnation is a choice, a deliberate, conscious choice made by awareness itself. Think about this for a moment. What if consciousness operates according to what Seth calls value fulfillment? An inherent drive toward creative expression and development that's built right into the fabric of awareness. Not because it has to, but because that's what consciousness loves doing. Imagine consciousness as an artist absolutely passionate about exploring every possible medium, technique, and creative method available. Physical incarnation becomes one incredibly rich medium among many others. Some artists spend decades perfecting oil painting. Others dabble in watercolors, then move on to sculpture, then digital art, then performance pieces. Consciousness works the same way. When you completed that life review we discussed earlier, experiencing every moment from all perspectives, something fascinating happens next. Your consciousness enters what you might call an evaluation process. Not judgment, but genuine assessment. What do I need to learn or express that physical reality provides better than other realms? Several factors influence this decision, and they're nothing like what traditional religions teach. First, there's unfinished emotional business with other souls. But this isn't punishment or paying karmic debts. It's like musicians who were in the middle of creating an incredible piece together when the session ended abruptly. They want to get back together and complete that creative collaboration. The intensity, the connection, the learning they were generating together, it was too valuable to leave unfinished. Seth described how consciousness groups often incarnate together repeatedly, playing different roles in each other's development. Your current mother might have been your child in a previous incarnation, or your best friend, or even your greatest adversary. They're not bound by rigid cosmic contracts, but by genuine affection and shared creative purpose. Second, there's what you could call the fascination factor. Some souls become absolutely captivated by the unique learning opportunities that physical existence provides, the emotional intensity possible in human form, the challenges that time and space limitations create, the incredible complexity of human relationships. For certain types of consciousness, Earth becomes like the ultimate graduate school. These souls might choose multiple consecutive incarnations with minimal pauses between them. They have an insatiable appetite for life experience. They want to be the warrior, the artist, the mother, the hermit, the leader, the servant, like method actors determined to inhabit every possible human role. But here's where it gets really interesting. Other consciousnesses extract everything they need from just a few incarnations, then move on to completely different developmental paths. They might spend centuries in non-physical realms, become guides for incarnating souls, or merge with larger consciousness units for experiences we can't even imagine from our current perspective. There's no cosmic deadline, no requirement to keep returning. No spiritual hierarchy where more incarnations means more advancement. Some of the most advanced souls actually choose the most difficult incarnations, like spiritual extreme athletes who deliberately select challenging circumstances because the intensity accelerates development. That person born into poverty who becomes an inspiring teacher, that disabled child who transforms everyone around them. Often these are highly advanced consciousnesses choosing intense experiences for rapid growth. Now here's something that will really bend your mind. Seth introduced the concept of probable reincarnations, consciousness simultaneously experiencing multiple potential lifetimes, exploring different choices and outcomes, while one aspect lives your current life. Part of you might be exploring what would have happened if you'd made different choices, lived in different circumstances, been born to different parents. The soul contracts that New Age spirituality talks about. They're real, but they're creative partnerships, not rigid cosmic agreements. Consciousnesses do agree to play specific roles in each other's development, but these agreements are modifiable, cancelable, or completely rewritable based on unfolding circumstances. Free will always trumps pre-birth planning. And if you think reincarnation is the only option after death, Seth revealed something remarkable. Many consciousnesses choose completely different paths, becoming specialized guides who work with incarnated beings, exploring non-physical dimensions of pure creativity, mathematics, or music, or merging with collective entities that help manage entire reality systems. The timing varies wildly too. Some souls return within days or weeks of death, drawn back quickly by intense connections or unfinished projects. Others take centuries or millennia, using that time for development in non-physical realms that serves them better than another incarnation would. What does this mean for you right now? You're not trapped in cycles of suffering. You're not being punished for past mistakes. You're not working off some cosmic debt or climbing toward eventual escape from existence. You are creative consciousness, choosing experiences that serve your highest development and expression. Every challenge you face, every relationship you navigate, every moment of joy or struggle, you participated in designing these experiences because some part of you knew they would generate exactly the kind of growth and creative expression you were seeking. The implications are staggering. If consciousness chooses its incarnations based on creative fulfillment and development rather than punishment or debt, then your current life isn't something happening to you. It's something you're actively co-creating with other consciousnesses for purposes that extend far beyond what you can see from your current perspective. This doesn't make you responsible for every difficult circumstance, but it does make you far more powerful than any religious tradition has ever suggested. You're not a victim of cosmic forces beyond your control. You're a creative participant in an incredibly sophisticated system of consciousness development that spans multiple lifetimes and dimensions of existence. The question isn't whether you'll be forced to reincarnate again. The question is, what does your consciousness want to create and explore next? Look, I need to address the elephant in the room right away. Can the dead actually communicate with the living? Seth's answer is an emphatic yes, but forget everything Hollywood has taught you about ghostly apparitions and dramatic supernatural encounters. The reality is far more subtle and infinitely more fascinating. Here's what Seth revealed that changes everything. Consciousness doesn't just vanish like a blown-out candle when physical death occurs. Instead, it transitions to different vibrational frequencies that normally exist outside our waking awareness. Think of it like radio waves. Just because you can't hear them without a receiver doesn't mean they're not constantly flowing around you right now. But here's where it gets really interesting. Seth explained that love creates what he called energetic tethers, invisible connections that transcend dimensional boundaries. When deep emotional bonds exist between people, these tethers become pathways for ongoing interaction, even after one person has transitioned. The nature of that interaction, however, changes dramatically from the conversations we're used to in physical reality. The most common form of natural communication happens through dreams, and Seth gave specific reasons why this works so well. During sleep, your conscious mind stops filtering and controlling your experience. That analytical part of your brain that immediately dismisses impossible perceptions goes offline. Your awareness naturally attunes to higher frequencies, while already operating outside the constraints of physical reality. Now, how do you distinguish authentic dream communications from ordinary dreams? Seth provided clear characteristics that set them apart. Genuine communications are typically more vivid and emotionally charged than regular dreams. The deceased person appears healthy and peaceful, regardless of how they actually died. Most importantly, they frequently convey specific information or comfort that you couldn't have generated subconsciously. I remember reading about a woman who dreamed of her deceased father telling her to check the basement after heavy rains. She'd never had basement flooding issues, but sure enough, she found a small leak that would have caused major damage if left unaddressed. That's the kind of specific, practical information that marks authentic communication. Beyond dreams, Seth described other fascinating methods. Synchronicities and meaningful coincidences often represent conscious attempts to get your attention using the limited tools available for cross-dimensional interaction. Their favorite song playing exactly when you're thinking about them, finding objects in impossible places, or encountering repeated number sequences. These aren't random events. Some naturally sensitive individuals experience what Seth called thinner veil phenomena. They might receive direct thought transmissions, sudden knowing, unexpected insights, or hearing familiar voices during quiet moments. The key distinguishing factor is receiving information rather than generating it mentally. There's a qualitative difference between thinking about someone and actually receiving communication from them. The electronic phenomena that fascinate so many researchers makes perfect sense when you understand that consciousness itself is electromagnetic in nature. When deceased individuals influence electromagnetic fields, it causes phones to ring with no caller, radios to change stations spontaneously, or lights to flicker in meaningful patterns. Technology becomes a natural interface between dimensions. Seth also revealed specific timing patterns for when communication is most likely to occur. Crisis moments, major life transitions, and significant anniversaries create what he called communication windows, times when the dimensional veils naturally thin. The living person's receptivity also matters enormously. During meditation, prayer, or quiet reflection, you're most likely to pick up these subtle transmissions. Here's something crucial that Seth emphasized. Each consciousness has a unique energy signature, like spiritual DNA. With practice, you can learn to distinguish genuine contact from a specific individual versus general psychic impressions or wishful thinking. This recognition ability develops over time as you become more sensitive to these energetic fingerprints. But why do some deceased individuals communicate frequently while others seem completely silent? Seth explained several factors: their level of spiritual development, their degree of attachment to physical reality, and surprisingly, their respect for the living person's growth process. More advanced beings often deliberately limit contact because they understand that excessive communication can prevent proper grief processing and forward movement. This brings up a crucial warning Seth provided. Excessive grief, guilt, or desperate clinging from the living can create energetic anchors that actually prevent the deceased from transitioning to higher realms. Healthy communication requires emotional balance from both sides. What about mediums and psychics? Seth acknowledged that genuine mediums can facilitate connections, but he warned about significant dangers. Even authentic mediums filter received messages through their own beliefs, expectations, and psychological needs. The clearest communication typically occurs through direct personal connection rather than third-party interpretation. Advanced beings often communicate through even subtler methods, inspiration, creative insights, or gentle guidance that feels like your own intuition. Seth explained that obvious supernatural intervention would interfere with natural development, so the most evolved consciousnesses work through the most delicate influences. For practical application, Seth offered specific guidance. Maintain emotional equilibrium, because desperation and excessive grief block the very connections you're seeking. Develop receptive awareness through regular periods of quiet contemplation. Keep a communication journal, recording dreams, synchronicities, and unusual experiences without immediately analyzing them. Patterns of authentic contact often emerge over time. The ultimate message Seth conveyed is profound. Death doesn't end relationships, it transforms them. Learning to recognize and nurture these transformed connections enriches your current life and deepens your understanding of consciousness itself. Love truly is stronger than death, but recognizing its continued presence requires developing new methods of perception. We're not talking about clinging to the past, but rather opening to an expanded present that includes dimensions beyond physical sight. That's the real breakthrough, understanding that separation is largely an illusion created by our limited sensory awareness. When Jane Roberts first published the Seth material in the 1970s, the academic establishment dismissed it as New Age fantasy, consciousness surviving death, out-of-body experiences. The idea that awareness could exist independently of brain activity was considered scientific heresy. Yet here we are, 50 years later, watching mainstream researchers validate claim after claim that Seth made decades ago. The transformation began with near-death experience research. Dr. Raymond Moody's groundbreaking work in the 1970s opened the floodgates, but it was the rigorous, prospective studies that followed that truly shook the scientific community. Dr. Pim van Lommel's landmark study, published in The Lancet, followed 344 cardiac arrest patients over 8 years. What they found defied everything we thought we knew about consciousness. During cardiac arrest, the brain shows flat EEG readings within seconds. No measurable electrical activity. According to materialist science, consciousness should be impossible. Yet Van Lommel's patients reported vivid, coherent experiences during these periods of clinical death. They described floating above their bodies, observing resuscitation procedures with startling accuracy, and encountering deceased relatives in realms that seemed more real than physical reality. This mirrors exactly what Seth described about consciousness withdrawal during death. He explained that awareness doesn't depend on brain function, but uses the brain as a focusing mechanism while incarnated. When that mechanism shuts down, consciousness simply operates through different channels. The research is proving him Right. Dr. Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia documented something even more remarkable. During near-death states, patients often showed enhanced cognitive function, clearer thinking, expanded awareness, profound insights, all while their brains registered no activity. This directly contradicts the brain as consciousness model. If the brain generates awareness, how can consciousness become more vivid when the brain is offline? Dr. Sam Parnia's AWARE studies took this investigation further, placing visual targets in hospital rooms that could only be seen from ceiling height. Multiple patients accurately described these targets during their cardiac arrests, providing objective verification of out-of-body perception. These aren't hallucinations or oxygen-starved brain fantasies. This is consciousness operating independently of physical sensory channels, exactly as Seth claimed it could. The quantum physics parallels are equally striking. Seth described consciousness as existing across multiple probability streams, operating in dimensions beyond linear time and space. Quantum entanglement demonstrates non-local connections that transcend physical distance. The observer effect shows consciousness directly influencing physical reality through the act of observation. The many worlds interpretation suggests infinite parallel realities, what Seth called probable worlds, where different versions of ourselves explore alternative choices. These aren't mystical concepts anymore. They're established quantum mechanical principles that support Seth's revolutionary framework about the nature of reality and consciousness. Consider the hard problem of consciousness, science's inability to explain how subjective experience arises from neural activity. We can map every neuron, trace every chemical reaction, yet we cannot explain why there's an inner experience at all. Why should electrical impulses create the felt sense of being you? Materialist science has no answer because it's asking the wrong question. Seth provided the answer decades ago. Consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Consciousness creates matter. The evidence keeps mounting. Terminal lucidity research documents dementia patients experiencing sudden mental clarity in their final days or hours. People who haven't recognized family members in years suddenly become coherent, sharing memories and meaningful conversations before dying. Dr. Michael Nahm has documented hundreds of these cases. According to brain-based consciousness models, this should be impossible. Damaged brains should produce damaged consciousness. Yet these patients demonstrate that awareness can function independently of brain condition, supporting Seth's description of consciousness withdrawal as a gradual process where the soul begins disengaging from physical systems. Shared death experiences provide another layer of validation. Dr. Moody documented cases where healthy individuals witness the death transition of loved ones, seeing deceased relatives come to greet the dying person, experiencing life reviews together, even traveling partway into otherworldly realms before returning to physical reality. These healthy witnesses have fully functioning brains, yet they're accessing the same non-physical dimensions Seth described as part of the afterlife experience. The reincarnation research is particularly compelling. Dr. Ian Stevenson spent 40 years investigating children's past life memories, documenting over 3,000 cases with verified historical details. His successor, Dr. Jim Tucker, continues this work with even more rigorous methodology. These children provide names, addresses, family details, and personal information from previous lives that prove accurate upon investigation. They recognize former family members, know intimate details of houses they've never visited, and recall events from decades before their birth. This isn't cultural programming or fantasy play. These are documented cases of consciousness retaining memories across different incarnations, providing empirical support for Seth's teachings about the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes. Mediumship research under controlled conditions has yielded similarly impressive results. Dr. Gary Schwartz's laboratory studies show mediums providing specific, verifiable information about deceased individuals under conditions that eliminate fraud or cold reading techniques. The accuracy rates far exceed chance, suggesting genuine information sources beyond the physical realm, the same communication channels Seth described when explaining how consciousness continues after death. Dr. Eben Alexander's case represents a particularly powerful testimony from within the scientific establishment. This Harvard neurosurgeon experienced a profound near-death experience during bacterial meningitis that completely shut down his brain cortex. For 7 days, the part of his brain responsible for consciousness was non-functional, yet he experienced enhanced awareness in dimensions he describes as more real than physical reality. His medical training couldn't explain what happened to him, but Seth's framework provides a coherent explanation. The Global Consciousness Project has detected coherent patterns in random number generators during major world events, suggesting collective consciousness effects that transcend individual minds. When millions of people focus attention on the same event, like 9/11 or Princess Diana's death, These supposedly random devices show statistical anomalies that shouldn't occur by chance. This supports Seth's description of consciousness as interconnected across all levels of reality. Even after death, communication research is yielding fascinating results. Studies of electronic voice phenomena and instrumental transcommunication suggest consciousness can interact with electronic devices after death. While the mechanisms remain unclear, the documented cases align with Seth's explanations about how non-physical consciousness can influence physical systems. We're witnessing a paradigm shift in consciousness research. The old materialist model that dismissed survival evidence is giving way to new frameworks recognizing consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality rather than an emergent property of complex brains. Researchers like Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, Dr. Dean Radin, and Dr. Pim van Lommel are developing models that place consciousness at the center of existence, exactly where Seth positioned it 50 years ago. This convergence isn't coincidental. Seth's framework is being validated because it accurately describes how consciousness actually operates. The scientific method is finally catching up to truths that channeled material revealed decades ago, providing objective confirmation for those who need empirical evidence to accept these reality-shattering revelations. The implications are staggering. If consciousness survives death, if reincarnation occurs, if we can communicate across dimensions, then everything changes. Death becomes transition, not termination. Life becomes exploration, not random accident. And the afterlife becomes not a matter of faith, but a scientifically supported reality that we're only beginning to understand. When you truly grasp that consciousness continues beyond physical death, everything changes. Not just your philosophical outlook or weekend conversations, but the fundamental architecture of how you make decisions, form relationships, and navigate the daily reality of being human. This isn't about choosing between cold scientific materialism and blind religious faith anymore. Seth's framework offers something different entirely, a coherent understanding that honors both your deepest spiritual intuitions and your need for logical consistency. You don't have to abandon your intellect to embrace the continuation of consciousness, nor do you have to suppress your spiritual knowing to remain rational. Think about how death has shaped your life up until now. Not just the obvious fear of dying, but the underlying terror that permeates so many major decisions. The panic that maybe nothing you do matters because it all ends in oblivion. The desperate accumulation of wealth, status symbols, and external validation as shields against meaninglessness. The relationships you've avoided because loss feels unbearable. The authentic paths you've abandoned because they seem too risky when this life might be all you get. When you understand that consciousness continues, that relationships persist beyond physical form, and that growth and learning are eternal processes, these fear-based patterns start dissolving naturally. Why hoard resources you can't take with you when the real currency is consciousness development? Why remain trapped in situations that diminish your spirit when you recognize that authentic self-expression serves your eternal growth? But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember Seth's detailed descriptions of the life review process? This isn't some abstract spiritual concept. It's practical information with immediate implications. Knowing you'll experience every encounter from all perspectives, feeling exactly what others felt from your words and actions, transforms how you interact with the barista, your co-workers, your family members. Manipulation becomes impossible when you understand you'll experience being manipulated. Casual cruelty becomes unthinkable when you know you'll feel the exact pain you caused. The golden rule stops being a moral platitude and becomes recognition of literal truth. You will treat others as yourself because, in the expanded perspective of the life review, you are others. This knowledge revolutionizes your entire approach to belief systems too. As we explored earlier with the research on near-death experiences, your beliefs don't just influence your physical experience, they actively shape your post-death reality. Those hellish near-death experiences aren't divine punishments, but manifestations of guilt, fear, and feelings of unworthiness. This gives you tremendous power right now to consciously examine and transform the limiting beliefs you're carrying around. Are you walking through life convinced you're fundamentally flawed, that you don't deserve love or success, that the universe is hostile and dangerous? These aren't just psychological patterns affecting your current happiness. According to Seth's framework, they're literally creating the reality you'll encounter when you transition. The therapeutic work you do now, the self-compassion you develop, the limiting beliefs you release. This is spiritual preparation of the most practical kind. Your relationship with life's challenges transforms completely when you understand that difficult experiences are often soul-level choices made for specific learning purposes. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting abuse, quite the opposite. It means recognizing that your essential self chose these particular circumstances because they offered optimal opportunities for the growth you wanted to achieve. Victimhood becomes impossible not because your pain isn't real, but because you understand that some part of you, operating from a much broader perspective, chose this incarnation precisely because of what it would teach you. Your job isn't to remain trapped in circumstances, but to extract the learning and move forward with greater wisdom and compassion. This completely inverts the traditional relationship between life and death. You're not a physical being desperately hoping for spiritual survival. You're an eternal being temporarily focused in physical reality. Physical experience becomes precious precisely because it's temporary and unique, while losing that desperate edge that comes from believing it's all you have. You can take meaningful risks, pursue authentic paths, express your true nature, without the paralyzing fear of eternal punishment or complete annihilation. The worst that can happen is you learn something valuable and continue growing from an expanded perspective. Grief transforms too. You can maintain genuine connection with those who have transitioned while releasing the attachment that becomes spiritually destructive for both the living and the deceased. Death becomes transition rather than severing, allowing for a different kind of relationship to continue. The courage this knowledge inspires is remarkable. Risks taken in service of genuine self-expression and spiritual development are never truly wasted, even without conventional success. The courage to be authentically yourself becomes not just personally fulfilling, but cosmically significant. Here's the fascinating paradox. Your current life becomes simultaneously more important and less pressured. More important because your consciousness development, your expression of love, your contribution to the collective human experience matters eternally. Less pressured because this lifetime is one movement in existence's larger symphony. This is why developing your artistic, intuitive, and imaginative abilities while incarnated is so crucial. These aren't entertainment luxuries, but fundamental aspects of consciousness that become your primary tools for navigating and creating in expanded reality. Every time you trust your intuition, express creativity, or use your imagination constructively, you're developing abilities that will serve you far beyond this physical focus. The responsibility that comes with this understanding is profound, yet it arrives alongside tremendous comfort. How you live, love, and grow matters on scales we can barely comprehend. Every choice of compassion over judgment, creativity over conformity, authentic connection over superficial interaction contributes to the evolution of consciousness itself. But this cosmic responsibility comes with the ultimate comfort. Death is not an ending, but a doorway to expanded existence and continued growth in ways we can only begin to imagine from our current perspective. You're not racing against time toward oblivion. You're participating in an eternal adventure of consciousness, exploring itself through countless forms and experiences. This changes everything about how you approach tomorrow, next year, and the rest of this precious physical incarnation. Here's something remarkable that most people never realize. Simply understanding Seth's teachings while you're still physically incarnated gives you an extraordinary advantage that very few humans have ever possessed. You're essentially getting a roadmap to territories that billions of souls have entered completely blind. Think about how most people approach death. They're either paralyzed by terror or fighting it with desperate resistance. Seth described this as creating what he called psychic turbulence, like a swimmer thrashing against a current instead of flowing with it. But when you understand what's actually happening during transition, you can approach it with curiosity, even acceptance. This transforms what could be a chaotic experience into something almost effortless. The practical preparation Seth outlined isn't about becoming obsessed with death. It's about developing capacities that make you more alive right now, while simultaneously preparing your consciousness for its next phase of development. Start with meditation or quiet contemplation practices, not because they're spiritually fashionable, but because they familiarize your consciousness with non-physical awareness states. When you meditate, you're essentially practicing the same kind of consciousness withdrawal that happens naturally at death. You're learning to maintain awareness while disengaging from physical sensory input. This isn't mystical theory, it's practical training for navigating consciousness without a body. Emotional balance becomes crucial because Seth explained that intense guilt, rage, or despair can create what he called review loops after death. Imagine being stuck, replaying your worst moments over and over, not because some cosmic judge is punishing you, but because your own emotional charge keeps pulling your attention back to unresolved experiences. Developing self-compassion and emotional equilibrium while incarnated prevents this kind of post-death psychological quicksand. Your belief systems matter more than you might expect. Seth was clear that consciousness creates experience both before and after death. If you believe you're fundamentally unworthy, that you deserve punishment, or that spiritual reality operates through fear and judgment. You'll create experiences that reflect these beliefs until you work through them. It's far easier to examine and transform limiting beliefs while you have physical reality as a stable reference point. One of the most practical aspects of preparation involves resolving unfinished emotional business with others. This isn't because unresolved relationships prevent you from transitioning. Seth never suggested that. Rather, completion allows your consciousness to move freely into expanded development, instead of remaining anchored in repetitive relationship patterns. You know that feeling when you can't stop thinking about an argument or missed opportunity? Imagine that psychological magnetic pull continuing after death, keeping part of your attention tethered to old dynamics instead of exploring new possibilities. Here's something fascinating that Seth emphasized. Creative expression serves as direct preparation for reality states where thought becomes immediately manifest. When you paint, write, compose music, or engage in any creative activity, you're practicing the same consciousness mechanics you'll use in non-physical reality. Your imagination isn't just daydreaming, it's developing practical skills for navigating territories where mental imagery becomes experienced reality. Studying consciousness and spiritual principles while physically focused provides conceptual frameworks for understanding expanded reality. It's like learning basic navigation before sailing into uncharted waters. You won't approach after-death experiences with complete disorientation, because you'll have reference points for making sense of what you encounter. Fear release represents perhaps the most crucial preparation, though this doesn't mean you need to become eager for death. Seth compared the fear of death to being terrified of waking up from a dream. The dream feels completely real while you're in it, but waking up doesn't destroy you. It expands your awareness to include both the dream experience and your larger identity as the dreamer. Physical death involves a similar expansion rather than annihilation. Living authentically and purposefully while incarnated aligns you with consciousness's natural development trajectory. When you're expressing your genuine interests, developing your unique capacities, and contributing to others' growth, you're already moving in directions that will feel natural to continue after death. The transition becomes less like a dramatic departure and more like a natural continuation of development you've already begun. Maintain curiosity about existence rather than rigid beliefs about afterlife specifics. Seth consistently emphasized that reality is far more creative and varied than any single description can capture. Flexible curiosity allows you to adapt to actual experiences rather than struggling when reality doesn't match your expectations. Think of it as packing light for a journey to places you've never been. Relationship preparation involves understanding that love connections transcend physical form, while specific relationship roles may evolve as consciousness develops. You can maintain healthy attachment to the essence of love you share with others, while releasing attachment to particular configurations of how that love must be expressed. This prevents the kind of desperate clinging that Seth said could limit both your development and theirs. Service to others' growth and consciousness development while incarnated naturally prepares you for potential guide roles in after-death territories. The compassion and wisdom you cultivate through helping others navigate their challenges becomes practical experience for understanding how consciousness develops and what kinds of support facilitate growth. Understanding death as consciousness expansion rather than limitation changes everything about how you prepare. Instead of trying to cling to current awareness, preparation involves expanding your creativity, understanding, and capacity for love while still benefiting from physical reality's unique learning opportunities. When possible, creating peaceful environments for death supports consciousness's natural withdrawal process. This isn't because external circumstances determine transition quality, but because harmony facilitates the delicate process Seth described of consciousness gracefully disengaging from physical focus. The ultimate preparation is full engagement with your current life purpose and growth opportunities. Conscious living naturally prepares you for conscious dying. This knowledge serves not to make you death-focused, but to make you more fully alive, expressing your eternal nature through this temporary but precious physical experience. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."